Good morning and welcome to this our second day of our conference. What is happening to my English? I'm going to request the following people to please come up to the platform. Professor Peter Simatei, who is going to chair our next session, and Professor Imani Sanga, whom I actually saw earlier on. Okay. I'm also going to request us to please come take the middle seats, or the middle seats, or the chair in the middle of the auditorium. We seem to be so spread out this morning. Thank you. And before we proceed, I'm also going to request us, if you are going to be available for the dinner, please register and pay with either 130,000 or $35. You'll be issued a receipt and we'll be glad to host you for the dinner. Thank you. So, Professor Simatei and Professor Sanga, as they come to take up their position. So our second keynote speech comes from Professor Imani Sanga, who teaches at the University of Dar es Salaam, and it's titled Sonification of Decolonial Acts, reading Shafi's Those Words. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Or as probably we would say in Kiswahili, amjambo washirika wa Mashariki. I think it sounds nice that way. You know, good morning, participants of Mashariki. Really, I have the pleasure of introducing our second keynote speaker, Professor Imani Sanga. And I think I'm really excited with this topic. First, I was just whispering to the outgoing chair that did you already notice that of all the presentation, perhaps this is the only presentation that focuses on Swahili literature, despite all our talk yesterday about the greatness of Kiswahili, what we should do with Kiswahili. So we are really lucky at least to have one presentation from none other than Imani Sanga. And I'm also delighted to meet him after a long time. So it was really a coincidence that the conference organizers decided that I introduce him. I was just thinking whether they were using the AI stuff to link to link speakers. So we actually met with Sanga in 2000. I'll be so brief, so don't worry. We met with Professor in 2007, if I'm not wrong. And what brought us together was the then, I think it was called African Scholars Program, in Amas, the 5 colleges in Amas, UMass, Mount Holyoke, Smith, and so forth. And when we arrived there, we realized actually that we were the last cohort. There had been about 4 or 5. And as we were looking at the archives, we discovered that Linda Spender had just preceded us. So later on, we met as sort of alumni at the Codesria annual conference. And that's when we knew each other, and we knew Spencer there was our senior in terms of that program. So it's good that we are gathering today here with those kind of personal histories also. And so you will allow me to, I think I have a text here to introduce Professor Imani Sanga, who is a professor of music in the Department of Creative Arts at the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He obtained his PhD in music from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. That was in 2006. His research and publications, and there are many, I've had to go through them, and publications focus on music, aesthetics, music of Tanzania, gender, and musical figures in Swahili literature. Currently, he is working on two book projects, one on the use of musical figures in Tanzania Swahili literature, and two on traveling sounds. He's a recipient of the following fellowships: African Scholars Program, the 5 College African Scholars Program, which I've just mentioned in 2007, African Humanities Program, 2009, National Humanities Center, 2019-2020, Wissenschaft Collect the Berlin Institute for Advanced Studies. This is one that he just won, and he will be, I think, reporting on, January 2024, so that is great. So Professor Sanga served as head of the Department of Creative Arts and deputy principal of the College of Humanities, that is in the University of Dar es Salaam. He is a composer and conductor of the University of Dar es Salaam Choir. He also coordinates postgraduate studies in the Department of Creative Arts. I am really, I was privileged to actually know when we were in Amas, sometimes on Sundays I didn't know what to do, but he had a lot to do because I think he was involved in some local opera, and by the time we were leaving, they were featuring his composition and production. So he's really a very talented person when it comes to music. So with that very shortened bio, join me in welcoming Professor Imani Sanga, please.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for the kind invitation and for giving me the honor and opportunity to give this lecture. And thank you very much for that. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to be in a company of such distinguished and friendly scholars, and for the hospitality of our hosts. Thank you indeed. My brother, Professor Simatei, thank you very much for the generous introduction and for the memories of 2007. I'm going to speak about the Sonification of Decolonial Acts in Selected Novels by a Zanzibari author, Adam Shafi. Let me note that this talk comes from my larger research project concerning the sonification of Swahili letters. And as you will see, my reading tools are fashioned in the departments of music and sound studies. So among his many novels, a Zanzibari author, Adam Shafi, has written 2 historical novels, namely Vuta N'Kuvute, Tug of War, and Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad, Fuad's Palace, which narrate and represent decolonial struggles and the 1964 Zanzibar Revolution. These novels evoke and use musical sounds such as songs, dances, drumming to shape the stories, plot, characters, their social relations, and the general point of view of the 2 novels. In this lecture, I want to examine various ways in which these novels deploy musical sounds to represent the colonial struggles and the revolution. I show that the freedom fighters and revolutionists in the novels use these sounds as hidden transcripts to communicate and to undertake revolutionary decolonial acts without being suspected by the government authorities. These sounds also serve as figures of identity representing specific racial and class assemblages and as tools for subverting or challenging racism. Adam Shafi Adam, or Shafi Adam Shafi, as his name appears variously in different publications, is a renowned Zanzibari novelist. Born in 1940, he studied education at the Said Khalif College of Education in Zanzibar, later renamed Chuo cha Walimu cha Nkuruma, or Nkuruma Teachers College. Then he received a diploma in political economy in the Democratic Republic of Germany and obtained training in journalism from different institutions in Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic, Sweden, and US. He is the author of several novels, including Kuli, Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad, Vuta N'Kuvute, Haini, Mtoto wa Mama, and Mbali na Nyumbani. Thanks to his works, Shafi is a recipient of a number of awards and honors, and I'm not going to mention them all. The concept of sonification in the title of this talk highlights 3 ways of using sound. These usages inform my method of reading the texts in question. First, following Louis Menges, I construe sonic figures as sounds or sound patterns that are fashioned and used in particular ways in order to represent and enact social assemblages, relations, or identities. In the case of the 2 novels discussed here, the social assemblages include colonizer, colonized, people of different racial groups dwelling in Zanzibar during the novelistic time, Indians, Arabs, Black Africans, white Europeans, as well as ruling class, landowners, or servants and tenants. Second, I use the concept of sonic decolonial acts to highlight various acts of liberation in the worlds of the 2 novels. These acts are performed by different actors with the goal of liberating the colonized people. It should be noted that the practice of orchestrating decolonial acts in Africa was and is widespread practice. Remember South African freedom songs, Zimbabwean Chimurenga songs, or Frelimo and Swapo songs. With the presence of a number of people from these groups in Tanzanian military training camps, the sounds of the freedom songs have been part of the everyday Tanzanian soundscapes. Drawing from these experiences, I construe sonic decolonial acts as songs or sounds that represent or describe the struggle, sounds that were or are used in the struggle, as well as artistic representation of armed struggle itself. As a Swahili poet, Kahigi captures these usages in his poem, Imba, Ndugu Yetu Imba. The poem, Imba, was written in 1979 at the height of decolonization struggles in South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Guinea-Bissau. And a young poet, Kahigi, was attending national service, or JKT, at Ruvu. The voice in the poem calls upon Africans in the mentioned countries to sing an anti-colonial and anti-apartheid song. And in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, he assures them, "We will sing with you." The poem also mentions 3 modalities of singing this decolonial song. Modalities which reveal that the decolonial song refers not only to freedom songs, but also to sounds of firearms and armed struggle more generally. Here is one verse from the poem. Imba, ndugu yetu imba, imba kwa sauti ya mdomo, imba kwa milindimo ya ngoma, imba kwa bunduki na mizinga, imba nasi tutaimba nawe. Sing and we will sing with you. Although my use of the concept of sonic decolonial acts draws from these practices, it also includes sounds that are used variously in literary texts to enhance the decolonial acts that the texts themselves undertake, that is, the critique of colonialism and colonial mentality. Finally, following and recontextualizing Hartman, I use the concept of sonic fabulation to refer to my reading strategy, which does 2 things. One, it highlights the role of music and sound in creating the novelistic narrative. And 2, it uses and evokes selected sounds to retell some of the novelistic events. This includes the visual images I've selected to illustrate this lecture, as you see in the PowerPoint. I'm not talking of an esoteric phenomena here. Sonification of letters, or the practice of evoking and using musical sounds, is a widespread practice in literary texts. Musical sounds, dance performances, musical instruments, songs, and musicians feature prominently in a number of texts ranging from Chinua Achebe's most celebrated novel, Things Fall Apart, to Ahmed Soif, In the Eye of the Sun, from Leila Saba's Sherazade to Zeik's Mda's Ways of Dying, from Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross to Okot Pabitek's classic poem, Song of Lawino, and from Shaban Roberts' Wasif Wasit bin Saad to Euphrates Kezirahabi's contemporary novels, Mzingile and Nagona, to make my list of sonified African literary texts very brief. At the very beginning of Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe, for example, tells about the heroism of Okonkwo by describing a musical orchestrated wrestling match in which Okonkwo wins the most unbeatable wrestler, Amalinze the Cat. This event itself plays a significant role in the novel by shaping the plot, creating the main character as a hero, and establishing the general cultural context. The description of musical sounds are interwoven with the details of the body movements of the wrestlers. And the narrator points out that music is so central to the cultural life of the community. As such, it is like a heart possession of a living organism. Music is also a heart possession of the life and struggles of the Algerian community living in France, trying to negotiate the quandaries of their identities in Saba's novel, Sherazade. To them, rock and roll and reggae music, for example, are associated with the Algerian youth and the struggle, whereas European classical music is associated with the wish of these Algerians to become French. And Arabic music represents Arab identity. Similarly, Egyptian singers such as Kulthum and Kamel in the Eye of the Sun are used to represent Egyptians and their heroic fight against the invaders during the Suez Canal War. So the above list could be extended indefinitely, making it unfit for this talk, and also impossible, thanks to my ignorance of many texts in many different languages. But I would like to make 2 brief points here. 1, the sonification of letters is a widespread aesthetic practice. And 2, there are specific ways through which sonic figures are deployed in East African literary texts, and the aim of this lecture is to explore the specific ways the two novels by Shafi deploy sonic figures to represent the colonial acts in Zanzibar. One of the crucial aspects in the historiography of Zanzibar and East African coast more generally is the fact that this part of the world has been in contact with the outside world as far as Persia, Oman, Yemen, India, and China, at least since the 7th century BC. Some groups of people from these lands also settled in Zanzibar and in other parts of East African coastal cities, intermarried with local people and became part of the Swahili communities. Other historical landmarks include the Portuguese conquest during the 15th century. The Portuguese ruled the coast of East Africa, including Zanzibar, until they were driven away by the Oman Arabs during the 16th century, and the Arabs stayed and ruled the coast. In 1840, with the growing Indian Ocean clove and slave trade, the Sultan of Oman moved his capital to Zanzibar. At the end of the 19th century, when Britain and Germany began to colonize East Africa, they formally recognized the Arab Sultan as the ruler of Zanzibar and a 10-mile strip along the coast of mainland under the 1886 Anglo-German agreement. However, a few years later, in 1890, Britain declared Zanzibar its own protectorate, and thus colonizing even the colonizer. The social relations during this long history of contacts, trade, intermarriages, and imperial conquest have been complex, involving not only trade, migration, and intermarriages, but also acts of enslavement, forced labor, squatter system, and colonial subjugation, most of which were characterized to varying degrees by racism and economic exploitation. Hence, the struggle for independence and the 1964 Zanzibar Revolution should be understood in part as a result of this long and complex history. The two novels by Adam Shafi, Vuta N'Kuvute and Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad, are among Zanzibar's novels which focus mainly on the struggle for independence and the subsequent Zanzibar Revolution. Vuta N'Kuvute is a novel that focuses on the life of a young Zanzibari woman of an Indian descent named Yasmin. After being forced to marry an Indian elderly man, Raza, she escapes and befriends Mwajuma, a black Zanzibari Swahili young woman. She also begins love affairs with Denge, a young black man who is part of the revolutionary group that undertakes underground decolonial acts against British colonialism and racism in Zanzibar. Through her daily life and musical engagements, Yasmin crosses the racial lines and begins to identify herself with the black Swahili community. Thus, her life epitomizes the struggle to end racism. Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad is a novel set during the last years of British colonial rule in Zanzibar, up to the time of Zanzibar Revolution in 1964. The story focuses on the life experiences of an African woman named Kijakazi, a name which means servant, itself in present descent in Zanzibar. In the same way, band music in the styles of ballroom or rumba is used to represent British colonialists and white European living in Zanzibar. I would like to cite a few notable examples from the novels to illustrate not only how these musical figures are used to represent social identities, but also how the characters in the novels evoke these musical figures to contest colonial racism. The main character in the novel Vuta N'Kuvute, Yasmin, commences her married life in Mombasa, Kenya. Her Indian identity is marked variously by the Indian music that she encounters as soon as she moves and begins to live with her elderly Indian husband, Raza, in Mombasa. When Raza, a business person, goes to work and leaves Yasmin alone at home, Yasmin does not only listen to nyimbo za Kihindi, Indian songs, she also sings along and dances to these Indian songs. The narrator identifies the kind of Indian dance Yasmin dances during these moments as Nachi. Later, when she makes a critical turn in her love affairs, when she turns away from being fully faithful to her Indian husband and begins to fall in love with a black African young man, she also deploys musical figures. Her turn begins with the occasion when the young man becomes interested in Yasmin's performance of nyimbo za Kihindi in Raza's house. The young man peeps through the window and watches Yasmin sing and dance. Let me read from the novel for some details. She, Yasmin, began chasing away her sense of being lonely by listening to Indian music. She decided to dance. She stood up in the middle of the living room and began to move her body. She did not realize that every day when she was dancing, there was a passionate audience of her dance, an audience who secretly watched her through the window. But today, as soon as she finished dancing, that ardent audience decided to congratulate her. He clapped and joyously applauded Shabash. The young man's desire for Yasmin is thus inextricably linked with his desire to listen to and stare at Yasmin's performance of Indian songs. His desire is at once a desire for the Indian girl and Indian music. Reciprocally, Yasmin's growing fondness for this African young man is also represented musically in terms of her desire to listen to and watch Swahili ngoma, such as chakacha. So she asks the young man to take her to the ngoma events. Her intimate desire for the young man is also complicatedly interwoven with her desire for chakacha and other Swahili music styles. And the narrator says she finally realized that her desire was not on chakacha, but on that young man. In short, there are three simultaneous layers of social interactions and exchange here. First, we see the intimate personal interactions between the two young individuals. Second, these interactions are at the same time interactions between two racial groups, Indians and Africans. And third, these interactions are at the same time musical interactions, interactions that involve two musical heritages, nyimbo za Kihindi and ngoma za Kiswahili. These musical and dance forms are also used to index various subversive acts. First, as we have seen above, they are used as indexical signs of the interactions between two racially defined and separated social groups. The interactions between Yasmin and members from the Black African community are subversive acts against cultural norms and colonial racially motivated prohibitions and rules concerning racial mixing, interracial mixing. The novel presents these decolonial subversive acts through the musical figures of Indian songs and ngoma. At one point, Yasmin magnifies her transgressive acts against colonial racism by actually escaping from her elderly Indian husband and going to live with a black African female friend named Mwajuma. She immerses herself into the lives of Waswahili to the extent of identifying herself as one of them. Her own Indian relatives reject her not only because of her act of running away from her Indian husband, but also because of her rights intermingling with the Swahili people. Yasmin's turn from her affiliation with her Indian relatives and community to her affiliation with her African friends and lovers is also accomplished musically through the figure of Swahili music styles, Taarab, Unyago, Swahili girls' initiation rites, and Chakacha. The novel represents Yasmin's immersion into Swahili life and her identification with and growing sense of belonging to the Swahili community through her active participation in Swahili musical practices alongside her hospitable friend Mwajuma. She too joins a Swahili Taarab club named Cheusi Dawa, a name that associates blackness and music with healing, perhaps the healing of racism. She too begins to perform Swahili Taarab as a singer at the club and at home. It is interesting to note that the novel identifies Mwajuma, her friend, as Mswahili through these Swahili musical tropes as well. And Mwajuma's identity as Mswahili is shown to be permeable and plastic, one that freely interacts with various other identities. This permeability and plasticity is expressed musically through Mwajuma's curiosity, receptivity, and ability to learn and sing Indian, Arabic, and Rumba dance songs, in addition to her usual Swahili songs. A similar challenge to colonial racism is staged by Young African Revolutionary Group, whose aim is to fight for Zanzibari independence. Among other targets of the group's subversive acts are nightclubs. The novel shows that, according to colonial stipulations, different racial groups have to go to different nightclubs. The English Club and Karim J Club are reserved for the high-class white minority. And Rumba music played at these special clubs is different from the Indian and Swahili songs played at other clubs. The distinction of Karim J Club, for example, is identified not only with the expensive decoration of the venue, expensive dresses of those who go there, and expensive high-quality cars one finds there, but also with the special music played at the club, which includes rumba, blue tango, and dance music played by police band. The distinctiveness of Karim J Club and the people who go there is posited in opposition with the social arenas for Africans or Waswahili. Take one arena located at Mlandege, for example. The place is described in a novel as so packed with people and the general atmosphere being chaotic. The place is so chaotic such that even the music that is performed there by the music club called Lucky Boys does not lead to calmness but disorder. And the sound of the music is described as thunder-like sound. In my reading, I don't think that the narrator is trying to say that Africans are naturally chaotic. I think the narrator tries to establish the distinction, in Bourdieu's sense, or the high class of the white clubs. With this distinction, the novel justifies Africans' desire and urge to struggle for equal access to the white clubs. Their quest to end colonial racism is represented by their demand to equal access to these cultural spaces and sonic pleasures. Their demand to stop the perpetuation of colonial racism is allegorically represented through their demand for the access to the club and its distinctive high-class music. Similar kind of segregation are represented in Shafi's other novel, Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad. However, Kasri, the other novel, shows that after the revolution, Karimjee Club is nationalized, renamed People's Club, and made accessible to all citizens, regardless of their race. The club becomes a place where racial integration is actualized. In this sense, the club is an index of the revolution, not only through the change of the name from Karimjee Club to People's Club, but also by its accessibility to people of all races. The pleasurable experiences at the People's Club are described with observable musical, physical phenomena, kivumbi, vigorous dancing, and with emotional phenomena, nyoyo kujaa furaha, literally participants' hearts being full of joy and pleasure. The club and the music performed at the club can also be read allegorically as representation of all the wealth and opportunities made accessible to all Zanzibaris after the revolution. At least this is how the novel puts it. Readers of Abdul Razak Guna, I'm thinking here of Jacinta's yesterday's presentation, for example, will have a completely different picture, different from the one that is presented in this novel. In addition to serving as a marker or trope of racial and class identities, music, and specifically ngoma, is also used in Shafi's novel Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad as a tool and tactical figure through which the decolonial act of Zanzibar revolution is successfully undertaken. The concept of ngoma is used broadly to refer to a festive event, a dance, and a musical instrument, drum. In describing the main musical event organized for the purpose of undertaking the Zanzibar revolution, the narrator says, and here is my translation, hundreds of farmers and workers came to the dance arena. Many different types of dances were performed, and there was a lot of noise at the arena, and people enjoyed these musical dances up until midnight. The variety of traditional dances or musical performances at the event included, and I'm mentioning the number of dances here, ngoma sugu, maumbwa, and gonga, among others. The term that the novel uses to describe the overall sonic product of the combination of all the sounds of different types of ngoma is kelele kubwa, loud noise. Rather than perceiving kelele kubwa negatively as noise, the novel describes the aesthetic experience of the participants of that ngoma with a positive concept of starehe, pleasure or enjoyment. To understand the use of ngoma for political revolution requires us to remember the political context. During colonial era, any gathering of local people, especially a gathering that was considered political in nature, was prohibited by the government. In Shafi's novel Kasri, political rallies are also prohibited, and therefore this particular ngoma event is organized in a way that its political intent is hidden. The revolutionaries use it as an alibi so that the government authorities do not suspect the hidden political plot. In other words, ngoma is used by the revolutionaries as a hidden transcript, to borrow a concept from James Scott. Ngoma, as a hidden transcript, is used by the oppressed people to enhance their plotting and execution of the revolution without being understood by government authorities. Illegibility by the authorities is the first condition of the efficacy of this hidden transcript. Hence, the use of ngoma by the subordinate group is not only a way of speaking behind the back of the dominant, as Scott would put it, but in this case, it is a means for enabling the group to meet and organize the revolution while having an official written permit from the government itself. The government authorities, in this case, are not part of what Kofi Agau calls semiotic interpretive community. Let me explain. According to the story, in order to maintain surveillance or of politically dangerous ideas of liberation, the government law requires that any lawful gathering must be officially permitted by the government. Thus, in order to meet this requirement, the organizers of the ngoma request and obtain an official permit from the government authorities to organize this ngoma event. However, in spite of this fact, the government authorities are blind or blinded of the other layer and goal of the ngoma beyond the veil of being an entertainment. The other layer of meaning is understood only by members of the revolutionary group. Only members of this semiotic interpretive community are able to read the hidden transcripts concerning the main agenda of this ngoma occasion. In other words, the very aesthetic of matte vocality and simultaneity of the ngoma enables it to perform multiple tasks at once. On the one hand, the ngoma serves as an entertainment and a source of pleasure. At the same time, it also serves as a cover-up of hidden revolutionary plot which is being organized thanks to the ignorance of the government surveillance apparatus. In short, ngoma, as a musical hidden transcript, is at once an object of aesthetic contemplation and a tool for political decolonization. I must conclude now. I began by showing that sonification is a widely used aesthetic technique in African, East African, and Swahili letters. In particular, sonic figures are used abundantly in novels, poems, plays, biographies, and other forms of literature and orature. In Shafi's novel, Vuta N'Kuvute and Kasri ya Mwinyi Fuad, the sonic figures are used to represent and enact social identities and assemblages. They are used to mark the three racial assemblages which during colonialism were understood to be worlds apart and were kept apart by a number of prohibitions and practices, including night clubbing and musical performances. In Shafi's Kasri, ngoma is used as a hidden transcript of the Zanzibar Revolution, enabling the freedom fighters to undertake the revolution without being suspected by the government authorities. Succinctly, a close attention to these sonic figures reveals valuable insights into the novels and the decolonial struggles the novels represent. The figures also enable us to experience the texts through our sonic aesthetic imagination. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you so much, Professor Imani. That was really insightful, and I think all of us somehow have gained a lot from the talk, especially giving you an idea of what Swahili literature is capable actually of producing in terms of aesthetics that we are all discussing. So, yeah, I think Isaac Moja. So I think I hand it back to you.
Thanks, Peter. I hope I'm allowed to call you Peter. And Imani. We were talking with Dr. Kotsia recently, and I don't know if she remembers this conversation. I said things to people, and then she said something about Professor Sanga, and she said, "That's a wonderful man." You remember that, Dr. Kotsia? That's a wonderful man. And she reminded me of Dar es Salaam 217 at the Eastern African Literary and Cultural Studies Conference before we became Mashariki. Thanks a lot for this, and like Peter says, opening us up to different ways of thinking about the Swahili novel. I'm not a Swahili speaker. My friends in Tanzania complain about that, but thank you so much. Rita, another round of applause to Professor Sanga and Professor Simatei for this. We have something Rita is going to do for us before we proceed.
Thank you very much, the chair of the keynote session and our keynote speaker. Thank you very much. We are going to have very brief moments. May I request Professor Reverend Sister Dominic DiPio, Department of Literature, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, to come forward. Is also Dr. Edgar Nautani with us? He stepped out. Okay. Sister will do it with Professor Grace Mosila. Kindly also join us, the chair Mashariki board. What is going to happen is Professor Reverend Sister, right? Dominic DePio and Professor Grace Mathila are going to help us present befitting Makerere University souvenirs to the keynote speaker. And then thereafter, yes, I'm glad Dr. Edgar Nautani, the head of department, has also joined us. And then what we'll have is this will be presented, and then we will have a photo. Thereafter, after that photo that is going to happen at the podium, after that, we'll then move to the entrance of the auditorium to capture the participants' physical for day 2. So we will all move briefly and stand at the entrance of the auditorium and ensure that we smile for the cameras. Thereafter, we'll earn our tea break. I'm requesting that for us to be a bit visible, you move. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Sanga. This is a great honor on behalf of Makerere University and the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. We want to give this as a present to you. This has been a wonderful presentation. And you are talking about Kiswahili literature, but what you said really is beyond Kiswahili literature. We really appreciate. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's time for a photo.
A photo. This is very historic because you're smiling for all of us. Yes, and then before we go for the group photo, Dr. Isaac Tivasima wishes to make some announcements. from the keynote, at some point, I was like, are we safe? I had words like a revolution that sounds, communicate a revolution. And I was like, but I think the keynote speaker means a safe revolution. So let me hand over back to Dr. Tibasima Isaac before we go for the group photo, so that you listen to some announcements. After the announcements, we'll go for a group photo outside the auditorium, and thereafter we proceed for tea. Isaac?
Thank you, Rita. So before we go for the announcements, I need to just let you know, our rooms are back to normal, so we will use the rooms that are in the program. Please make sure that you look at the schedule and follow those rooms. We have 3.1, we have 3.2 and 4.2 for the different sessions. We will also have sessions in the auditorium. The other thing, again, like I said earlier on in the morning, please, if you want to attend dinner, please register at the desk. After lunch, we may decide to behave not so nicely regarding that. And when we're done with the photo moment, please, tea is served. It will be for strictly 30 minutes, and then we'll move on to our sessions. It's after break? Your session? After break. Okay. So before, I just need to let us know, there is a panel on Professor Kaha's book, and that panel has been shifted from this room to room 3.2, and the session in 3.2 has been shifted here because of the technological issues regarding those different sessions. So we'll let you know a little more about that before the lunch break. Please, let's do the photo moment, and the tea is ready in the foyer. Welcome.